welcome to Patch and Play, June 15th, 2026. My name is Jimmy, aka Perceptes, and this is a live stream that I do on a regular basis to have some fun with modular synth patching here with the community live. So, I will start with my usual preamble as people start to trickle in over the first few minutes. If you are here for the first time, welcome. I'm glad to have you. And for any of the repeat viewers that will be here, I'm also very glad to have you. Appreciate the support. Bad Machine, welcome to the stream. Good to see you again. So I like to start these streams by giving a little context for what we're looking at and what the stream is about. First of all, what you're looking at is a modular synthesizer. A synthesizer being a musical instrument that produces sounds electronically. And modular is distinct from what you might usually think of as a synthesizer in that it's composed of a whole bunch of tiny little building blocks where each of these little squares is an individual piece of hardware that performs one function that is a part of a larger instrument. And there's a zillion of these made by a bunch of different companies, and you can sort of mix and match them and build a system that is specifically tailored for what you want to do with it. And they communicate with each other with these little 3.5 millimeter patch cables. That's kind of like what you would use to plug in a set of headphones back in the days when you could actually plug in headphones and everything wasn't wireless. And they just plug in between these jacks and it sends electricity over the wire, and that's how they talk to each other to build a larger system. So, oh, Tyler, good to see you. Welcome to the stream. So that's what these two big boxes are. This is a modular synth that I've constructed for my purposes. And there's a lot of different things that you can use a modular synth for because it can do all of the things that a normal synth or effects processor can do. So you can use it for sort of a sound design tool to make funny sounds that you sample into a hardware sampler or your computer to use for something else later, or you could do an effects processor for processing your guitar or some other sort of instrument, or you can do what I have here, which is kind of like the Groovebox approach, where you have a little bit of everything. So I've got melodic voices, percussive voices, filters, effects, processing, mixing, utilities, sequencers, and everything that I need to make a full piece of music just right in front of me. So the two big cases are kind of the main sort of focus, but I also have this smaller case down here on the right, which is just kind of my spillover case for things that don't fit in the big one. And if you watched my channel before, you'll see me use this for sort of demos where I'm focusing on a particular idea or technique in a small, compact setup. And then this little rectangular box over in the bottom left is the Oxy 1, which is a hardware sequencer, which is used as sort of the main brain of a setup. So it can sequence 8 different channels of melodic or percussive voice, technically more than that, but the general idea is that it has 8 sequencers. And then it plays very well with modular synths because I've got this cable running out of the back of it that's plugged into this little black module here on the left of my black case. And this has all of the outputs, so I can plug the outputs from this into wherever I want on my case and sequence things like pitch, note on-off, drum triggers, and whatever I want that's been programmed on here. So that's the lay of the land. About the stream itself, for anyone who's not already familiar with my channel, I do musical performances where I sort of record myself live playing something and then post the music and kind of how it was made. And I also do a lot of educational videos that's primarily focused on modular synthesis. And so what I want to do in these streams is start with a blank slate and with not a specific idea of where we're going to go, because all of my videos are like fairly carefully prepared. I'm teaching you a specific thing or explaining a specific thing, and I know in advance what I'm going to do, and I kind of know how it's going to go. And I've gotten many requests for kind of seeing like, how do you get from A to B? How do you get from nothing to the zillions of wires that we see in the final performance when you do a real piece of music? And so we don't usually get as far as that in these streams, but the goal is to kind of show a little bit about the process of figuring out what to do, how to decide what to connect to what, and also just exploring the various different things that you can do with modular. Because every time is kind of an adventure. You don't really know what you're going to end up with. Is definitely a bit of an exploratory part of the process. And because it is a live stream, in addition to being educational and entertaining, I do want it to be as interactive as possible, because I could just film myself offline doing something like this. But because I'm doing it live, if there are people in the chat watching live, I would appreciate any questions that you have about modular synthesis in general, about other, aspects of hardware music production, or about anything specific that I have in my cases, like you want to see a specific module being used, or understand how it works a little better, or even just a specific technique. Please don't hesitate to ask. Don't hesitate to interrupt me regardless of what I'm talking about, because this stream is for you as much as it is for me. And I want to focus on what you're interested in seeing, what you're interested in learning. MIDIman741, welcome to the stream. Very nice to see you. And per the usual with these streams, I have a nice cup of jasmine tea, and I'm going to do my best to finish drinking this before it gets cold, because I usually forget, or I just feel like I'm, not talking enough to keep everyone entertained. So if you haven't seen me drink in a while, remind me. And I'm going to start now. Sadly, I ran out of the really nice green tea that some friends brought me from Taiwan, so I'm on to kind of like regular supermarket green tea, with apologies to the tea connoisseurs for doing so. Today, we actually have kind of a special, unusual thing that I don't think I've done on this stream before. I ordered a highly coveted module that I've wanted for a while that has been unavailable for a long time, and it arrived 10 minutes before the stream started. I kid you not. So unfortunately, I didn't have time to sort of architect my cases to fit it in, but I thought it might be fun to start the stream off while we're waiting for people to trickle in with just unboxing this thing and chatting a little bit about it. And maybe I could kind of slot it in somewhere and we can mess with it today. Otherwise we can, figure out something else to do. But without further ado, this right here is the natural gate from a company called Rabid Elephant. This is a low pass gate, which is kind of like a combination between a filter and a VCA. And it's really good at making organic, sort of plucky sounds that mimic the acoustics of a real instrument. So it's pretty expensive for what it is. I mean, a lot of people think so. And it's very rare. Like, as soon as they go in stock, they're sold out very quickly. And so I've been following the website of this guy, and the guy that makes this, or I assume it's a guy, I guess that's an incorrect assumption on my part. But anyway, Rabid Elephant makes these in batches occasionally, and they always sell out very quickly. So I'd been, people have waited like up to 18 months for one of these. And I had been kind of following the website. I signed up to the newsletter to try to get, some advance notice about a drop on a restock. And I saw that there was one coming up, and we got email a couple of weeks ago saying there's about to be a new batch of stock of the Natural Gate, and most of them will go to fulfilling existing pre-orders, but there'll be a small handful of them that are available for purchase. And I didn't know how many that was or when exactly the drop would happen, so I was checking the website like multiple times a day, waiting for that sold out button to turn into an add to cart button. And I happened to catch it, and then I went to Modwiggler, the website forum that a lot of us hang out on, and I saw that the thread about Natural Gate had been recently bumped. I was like, yeah, someone else noticed that there was stock too. So sure enough, that someone else had been doing what I was doing and was like checking the website every day. And then I went back to the website to look, and it was already sold out. So there was a window of like less than 24 hours where this thing was available to people that didn't already have an existing pre-order. So I'm very lucky that I got this in time. Also because in the newsletter, Rabid Elephant said that this is going to be the last batch of this that they make for some time, that they're going to be working on new designs and focusing their time there. So it may be quite a while before you're able to get one of these. And they're popular enough that I have not seen one appear secondhand on Reverb or anything. So I'm sure they get resold once in a while. But I thought it would be great to have kind of this, a new piece of this great hardware. So why don't we open this rather than just staring at the beautiful elephant on the box? Huh? Hopefully there's no receipt inside and I don't dox myself. Okay, beautiful bubble paper. Very exciting. Glad I spent all my money on this bubble paper. All right, we got the usual ribbon cable. We've got a couple of, actually several screws, 4 screws. And inside here should be the module. There it is. Natural gate. I guess I should zoom in, actually, so we can see this with a little bit more detail. Let me zoom in on maybe the pod, and I can put it right here so you can see it up close. But yeah, it's dual mono. So the left half of the module and the right half are the same controls and just mirror images of each other. And it's got some interesting designs that I've read a bit about, and I've watched some of the videos, and I don't fully understand it. So it's going to require some exploration to really figure this thing out. Let's see, is it at the same size as one of these guys? I wonder if I should just slot it in place of like the black stereo delay or something. Should we? What do you all think? Do you want to hear this today, or should we wait till next week to explore this? I guess I could try slotting it into the small case on stream. Apparently this has like a ridiculous number of components in it also. I saw a video of like it being manufactured, and it's got a lot of detailed, I don't know if you can see on this very well on the stream, but it's got a lot of little parts in there. It's very nice looking. Yeah, no stickers. What a shame. What do you think? Should I send it back because they didn't give me a rabbit elephant sticker? I feel like for $10,000 or whatever this thing cost, that's justified, right? All right, well, if people want to see this today, then maybe we'll try to slot it into the small case. But for the meantime, we'll see what else people are interested in. I'll definitely have it into a larger setup by next week. I've kind of been planning on Modular Grid, which is the website that allows you to sort of plan and design these cases, to figure out what I'm going to take out of the dark case to make room for the natural gate. And so I have kind of a concept of what's going to get removed. I can't actually remember offhand. But things will be notably reconfigured by next week. I'll probably do that right after the stream, in fact. I feel like it's inevitable that I'm going to get another large case as I start to accumulate enough modules to kind of overflow these two and the small one. But I have to think about the constraints of how I'm going to fit it all on screen. I suppose it doesn't all have to be on screen all at the same time. And obviously I don't use every single module in every single patch I make, so it's not like they all actively have to be in the cases, but it's also time consuming to move them in and out of the cases and sort of reconfigure things to fit. So I mostly like to keep things more or less as they are. I did do actually some reconfiguration of the light colored case in the last couple of weeks. I think it may be the same as what I had in the last live stream. I actually can't remember. Oh, another funny thing, which anyone who was here last week, I think we talked about IntelliGel Amps, which was the newest module that I'd had as of last week, which is this dual VCA over here on the left. And while I was testing this out, I always like to test out all of the features and all of the inputs and outputs and switches and dials and everything when I get a new module, just to make sure that there's no physical problems with it or defects, because I don't want to like discover something weeks later out of the return window. And one thing I noticed is that on the right channel, or actually on both channels, there's this polarity switch that toggles the possible inversion of the incoming CV signal. And it's supposed to be just plus or minus, but I discovered on the right switch that it was actually a triple position switch, where there was a negative, a positive, and a center position. And the center position seemed to like disable the CV signal, and there was nothing about it in the manual. So I was like, is this some undocumented feature? And if so, what is the use case? So I emailed IntelliGel to ask them, and they said, oh, that's a manufacturing error. Like somehow we accidentally put in a triple switch in what was supposed to be a double switch. So recommend you just return it or exchange it with the manufacturer. So that's funny. And so I sent it back last Monday, and the replacement actually came on Saturday, which was great. I thought it was going to take longer to get it back, so I'm happy to have this in my case. Yeah, we could talk about amps. I I lately I've been releasing one video per week in addition to doing one live stream per week. And the video that I'm going to be working on this week for release next week is going to be talking about ring modulation using amps. So to some degree, I kind of don't want to spoil that on the live stream today, but we can talk about it anyway. I guess it doesn't really matter. And of course, there's other use cases for this. The main reason that I got it, which I think I've talked about on the stream before, is that there was a performance that I did back in February called Free, F-R-I-E, which you can find on the channel. And in that patch, I literally ran out of VCAs. Like there was something that I wanted to do that I had no way of doing because there was no free VCAs that I already used all of them. And so I was like, okay, well, as they say, you can never have too many VCAs. And generally I haven't really filled them all up because a lot of the stuff I use has a built-in VCA, like a lot of the voices. And so it just hadn't come up before that I'd ever ran out. And I was like, well, I kind of need just a little bit more. So that is, that's where this came. That was kind of the impetus for getting this. And I think also, it's been a few months, so I don't remember, but I think I was using some of the kind of quote unquote VCAs, like the, it's not a VCA, but the quadrat is, can be used for attenuation, which a VCA can also be used for. And I was using that for like audio mixing. And I think maybe I was even doing some audio mixing with the quad VCA. So kind of wasting its use as a VCA. And I've also since gotten the Vostok Instruments Hive, which is down here in the pod case. This is a 4-channel stereo mixer, which I think we talked about last week. And so this will also alleviate some of the times where I've been using the quad VCA as a submixer. Now I can use this for that, and I won't use up VCA channels just for basic mixing. Yeah, amps is great, isn't it? So yeah, let's talk about it. So it's, I guess, fairly straightforward compared to some modules, but it's a little bit different than a usual VCA. So for anyone that's not familiar, VCA is voltage controlled amplifier, and basically it allows you to change the level of another signal. So it's got an input and an output, and it's got 2 channels that are identical. So you plug in generally an audio signal, although I believe it works with control voltage also. I think it's DC coupled. But generally as the sort of the basic use case, you plug an audio signal into this and you take an audio signal out of it, and then the slider controls the volume of the signal coming out. So all the way down, it's fully attenuated. All the way up, it's letting the full signal pass through. And then you can also plug a control voltage into the CV jack, and that can be used to sort of automate the position of this knob or this slider. So you can control the volume of a sound over time. And this little trimmer here is used to attenuate the CV signal. So you can kind of reduce the amount by which the signal opens the VCA. I should also mention, in case you can hear a dog barking in the background, it's funny, for those of you that were here last week or who watched the recording, you will recall that we had some very unfortunate technical difficulties where I forgot to plug in the mains power on my camera and the battery ran out. And so it kept like powering off midstream. And we ended up stopping early because I had to constantly like reset the camera every 5 minutes, which was getting annoying. I was really focused on that, and I was like, I can't do that again this week. So that's good. We shouldn't have any technical problems there, but there might still be some interruptions because I am dog sitting for a friend. And so you may hear some woofing in the background. So apologies for that. So amps, that's the basic idea. And then it's got a couple of other features which generally VCAs don't have, which are these switches. So the top switch on each side is a level control. So this is a 3-position switch. In the center, it doesn't do anything. If you flick it to the left, it will double the gain of that channel. So you're essentially doubling the volume. And if you have the volume already at max, it's going to start to distort because it's kind of going too hot. And then you can use that for either intentional distortion, or you can use it for like bringing up sort of like a signal that's just too low, that even when maxed out doesn't get loud enough. And then if you turn the switch to the right, it's plus 20 dB. So that's a fairly significant amount. I think that's like roughly 4 times the input gain. So you can use this either for bringing in like a line level signal from another piece of music gear, or from your computer or something, and boosting the signal up to the level that is used for Eurorack. So that's a really cool thing that amps has that oftentimes a VCA will not. The lower toggle switch, as I mentioned, is a polarity inversion for the CV. So you can take like a unipolar control signal and invert it to sort of, bring, let's say you have, well, I guess we can start demonstrating this. Maybe that would be easier than just me talking through it. Let me grab let's see, what are we going to use? Maybe we'll just use the wavetable from Beads to start. So let's plug this into the input. And then let's get a long cable from the output to our mixer. Let's see, how does that sound? Let's turn this off. So Beads is just in wavetable mode, producing us kind of a continuous tone when there's no audio input plugged in. I'll modulate the time so it'll change the wave from the table a bit. Get some reverb going, just so we have a sound to work with. Hey, Satcom Demon, welcome to the stream. Yes, that's right, actually. Quad VCA does have a boost, similar to amps. But yeah, I think you see this is the Quad VCA over here. So it's a 4-channel VCA from Intelligel, same company. And it does have a toggle switch that boosts the volume. But yeah, I think it just is the equivalent of the left switch on amps, or the left position of the boost switch. So it'll go plus 6 dB, which is like double the volume effectively. But it can't go higher than that. So amps has the benefit of the plus 20 for bringing in line signals or for distorting. And interestingly, amps is actually exactly half the size, width-wise, as Quad VCA. So if you had 2 amps next to each other, you actually have the same number of channels in the same width. And amps comes with a cable that you can use to connect multiple amps on the back inside the case. So you can actually chain more or less as many amps as you want to create sort of a multi-channel VCA mixer. I think maybe if I didn't already have the Quad VCA, I would have gotten 2 amps, but it's kind of nice having both. Just kind of different interfaces to the same idea. Okay, so here is the full volume of Beads coming through. How's the audio level, by the way? Are you able to hear the audio okay in relation to my voice and I'm not too quiet or too loud? I feel like the audio sounds a little quiet to me compared to my voice. But you can tell me what you hear. So right now I have the manual offset all the way open. If I slide this all the way down, then we'll hear nothing. It just completely attenuates it. So that's just like a volume control, like on a mixer. And then if I plug a CV signal into this, so maybe we will take like an LFO just to demonstrate. Let me turn off the existing channel here. Reset this from whatever I was doing before. Okay, so here's an LFO from Stages. If I plug that into the VCA input, and then let's bring the slider all the way down. And speed up the VCA, or speed up the LFO a little bit. Sounding okay? Good. So this is just a unipolar LFO going from like 0 volts to 5 volts back and forth in I think like a sine or triangle wave shape. And that's just the equivalent of moving the slider up and down. So that's the basic application of a VCA, is used to control generally the volume of a signal over time. But you can put other things through it. So yes, thank you for confirming that amps is indeed DC coupled, which means that you can send control signals through it as well as audio signals. And so you can take, for example, a modulation signal and let a different amount of that modulation signal through to the final output by controlling the VCA. So this is a way of sort of modulating modulation, and is one of the really fun and interesting parts of modular synthesis. So right now, I've got the the slider all the way down, and the CV trimmer is like full positive. So if I start to like decrease the trimmer on this, the sound will continue to sort of appear and disappear at the same rate, but it won't get as loud. I'll stop talking so you can really hear it. Until it gets very quiet. So that's the effect of attenuating the CV signal itself. If you think of like this modulation signal as kind of like automating the movement of this slider up and down, it goes by default all the way to its top position. But if you bring this attenuation down, then it kind of like sets the point of the slider where it maxes out to. So you're going between 0 and this, 0 and this, 0 and this, as you attenuate it more. And you can actually hear, you know, since we're starting with the slider all the way down with the signal completely cut, then 5 volts coming in on the CV input is just bringing us to the maximum position. But if we start at the maximum position, then adding additional, opening of the VCA with CV is going to push it beyond that point, and we're starting to get a little distortion. Let's listen to that. You hear that, how it's distorting? So this is another kind of usage of a VCA, is you can use it as an overdrive. And not all VCAs are built the same, so it may be that some are not designed to do this. But it's not super uncommon that, the circuitry in a VCA is designed specifically to let you create this type of overdrive, generally with like a pleasing tone. And then we can try to change these boost switches to get different amounts of distortion. So let's try plus 6 dB. Oh, I guess, there we go. So that's much more audible distortion, right? Because it's not just at the loudest points that it starts to overdrive. You get kind of more of the full body of the signal getting overdriven. And then we can switch to plus 20, and this should be very distorted. Because now the signal is going far beyond kind of its maximum point, and we're clipping a lot of the waveform. And of course it gets louder too, because we're spending more time at sort of extreme voltages. But I think it actually sounds pretty good as a distortion, just you straight up using this as a distortion module rather than, as a typical VCA. Oh, I don't know if I greeted you, Mowgli. I apologize. Welcome to the stream. If I did not forget. Or if I forgot. So what have we not talked about? Okay, so yeah, there's also the inversion switch on the CV. So before, when I did this, where I have this, the slider in the sort of all the way down position, and then with a unipolar signal, we're modulating from the bass position to something higher. But we can also invert that, so I can put the slider at the top, and with as we demonstrated with a unipolar voltage, this is going to kind of push it beyond maximum volume, and so you get the distortion. But if I flip the inversion switch, you can see that green LED is now red, indicating that the CV coming in is being applied negatively. And so now what we're hearing is we're starting at maximum volume, and whenever the voltage is high on the LFO, the position of the offset is effectively moved down towards silence. So you get kind of the opposite effect. Let's try with a different modulation shape. Maybe we'll increase the volume a bit. It's a little clicky. Here, let's try this. This is a square wave, so it's just back and forth on off with no smooth motion. And it's a little bit clicky because it's just kind of going from one extreme to another. If we go to these kind of more smooth shapes, then we don't hear the clicking. And then you can also do, other combinations. Like, for example, if we take instead of this unipolar LFO, let's try taking a bipolar LFO that's going both above and below 0 volts. I get a longer cable for this. We'll take one from Oct. Is this gonna... Yeah, this should reach. So let me go to my full screen camera for a second so you can see what I'm doing. So on the right case, I've got Oct from Instro and DivKid, which most people are familiar with, but it's a 8 output LFO with each output sort of like manually tuned to be a time that, or like a rate that doesn't really match the other ones. So you have control of the bass rate with this knob, but it's not clocked to like a BPM. And so you're going to have these like modulation signals that are kind of more organic, that like weave in and out between each other. And it's bipolar again. So when the lights are white, it's positive. When they're orange, it's negative. And so this is just a really handy modulation source because it's so easy to use. You just patch it to your destination and you're good. So let's take a bipolar signal and put it into the CV input on amps. And so now we're essentially moving the slider up and down. So if I put it at its sort of mid position, let's put the inversion switch back to positive. So we're taking the signal exactly as it is. And so now we're starting at the middle position where there's a little bit of volume and moving it up to max and then down to the minimum and back. And we can use, of course, the CV attenuation to change the amount that it strays from that middle point. So if I turn the CV, if I fully attenuate the CV, then it'll stay at that sort of 50% volume. And the more CV signal I let through by bringing up this attenuator trimmer, the more it starts to waver back and forth from that middle point. Sean Chud, welcome to the stream. You got a Kith Ruina? That's awesome. I have the Ruina Versio, which I think is more or less a similar distortion DSP, but on the Versio platform, which is like the flashable noise engineering effects platform where you can try a bunch of different firmwares on the same hardware, which is one of the big values of that. Yeah, I think it sounds really good. Let's try the plus 20 again. Yeah, this sounds cool. I think it's a great sounding overdrive. I mean, even just with like this one input of beads modulating its wave, it's very pleasant. Let's give it some more. I mean, in this case, I was applying reverb, so we're actually distorting the reverb also. Let's go fully wet on the reverb and see what like distorted reverb, fully wet distorted reverb sounds like. You know, I don't do as much like reverb distortion as I should, because I know it's like kind of a common technique for like shoegaze. Usually you have a distortion and then you apply the reverb after the distortion, but if you actually distort the reverb, then you get a very kind of interesting texture that I feel like is kind of a hallmark of shoegaze. Let's try a different bank of wavetables. That's pretty damn cool, huh? Let's do a little, add a little automatic modulation of the pitch so it kind of warbles the pitch a little bit. That's pretty cool. Yeah, the fun knob. By the way, I will have you all know that I'm doing pretty good on my tea. I'm almost done and it's not cold yet. This may be a record for finishing my tea. The screen violence pedal from Old Blood Noise Endeavors does a great switchable distortion display. Interesting. I have a few distortion pedals, but there's like so many. I feel like I'd spend my whole life collecting distortion pedals and never have them all. I don't have anything from Old Blood Noise. So distortion delay, can you say more about what it actually does? Are you talking about the kind of like distortion into a time modulation effect, like I was saying with reverb, or the delay applied after the distortion? I guess with a really short delay time and kind of like a diffuse delay, you can get kind of something that's bordering on reverb. This is kind of nice too, just like having it at the plus 6 dB setting and just giving it enough CV that it just has a little bit of overdrive on kind of the higher points. Maybe not quite as much as I'd like. Let's try taking the reverb out. It seems like having the reverb on there kind of smooths out the peaks of amplitude coming from beads, because it wasn't distorting as much with the reverb fully wet. I guess that makes sense, because it's kind of removing the dry signal entirely. Sounds pretty nice. So you can switch which is first, delay distortion or distortion delay. Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I like that. I kind of wonder why is that like a common thing in guitar pedals to sort of like have a dedicated control for sort of reordering the signal flow like that? It seems like a very cool idea, but I assume that it's not super common. Runa Versio actually works like that too. Let me switch to the right case. So this guy, Runa Versio, is a distortion from Noise Engineering that I was mentioning after Sean said that he has the Kith Runa. And this has this toggle switch right here has over, under, cross, and over, which just like changes the order that the signal flows through these various different effects. So there's like wave folding, octavizing. This thing focuses like where the drive is emphasized in the frequency range, and then doom I think is like a sub-octave generator, and so this will change like which one the signal goes through first, and you get kind of like a different quality of distortion depending on which mode you're in. I can never remember exactly what the signal flow is. I think it isn't maybe that important to kind of know exactly what the order is. You mostly just use your ears and try a few different settings to find something that you like. But I think it's a really cool idea. And especially for something like that, where you get like dramatically different effects based on the order of the effects that are applied. I think that adds a lot of versatility to a piece of gear. Cool. So one thing I didn't talk about on amps is that it also has like a cool normaling path. So the CV input, the main input, and the output on the left channel will normal into the right channel if nothing's plugged into the right channel. And so this also opens up some possibilities, and it's another thing that distinguishes it from quad VCA. Because on quad VCA has kind of a similar idea. You can see that the four CV inputs are kind of oriented vertically instead of horizontally, and they normal into each other. So you can have a single CV input that will be, if you don't patch anything into the ones below it, will automatically be applied to all four channels. So you can use the same CV signal to control multiple VCAs. And then similarly, the outputs chain into each other. So if you, for example, have like four things plugged into the four inputs, but you only take a cable out of the fourth output, then you get all four of those channels mixed into a single signal. And so that's how you can use it for just audio mixing. And of course, amps does that also. It has the CV normaled from left to right, the output normaled from left and right. But unlike the quad VCA, it also has the input normaled from left to right. So there's cases, so you can do things like taking a single audio source and applying two different CV levels to it and sending a copy of those, or like one each of the modulated signals to two different destinations for like parallel processing or whatever it is you might do. Yeah, aren't many that offer it. Yeah, I think it's a really cool idea. So this is another cool thing about amps. And then I probably won't talk about it right now just to save some of the goods for the video that for next week. But one of the things you can do with amps is ring modulation, because there's a switch right here that inverts the phase of the B side, which effectively inverts the polarity. So anytime the input is positive, the output will be negative, and vice versa. And then with the normaling, you can use those to combine and phase cancel and create ring modulation effects, which is definitely something that the quad VCA cannot do by itself. So you could create that out of, a series of modules that have all of the basic building blocks, like, the ability to invert and offset and stuff. But being able to do it all in this very small 6 HP module is pretty cool. Pretty cool indeed. So yeah, stay tuned to the channel. There will be some more details about using this for ring modulation. Any other questions about amps before we look into maybe something else? Let's see if I finish my tea. I did. Great success. Look at that. Although I'm still thirsty, so it's a good thing I have water too. All right, for anyone who wasn't here at the beginning, just a reminder that regardless of whatever I'm talking about, I would be more than happy for you to interrupt me with comments and questions if there's anything specific that you would like to talk about, in terms of techniques, the details of a specific module, or anything like that. Thank you, Tyler. Yeah, it's great. I'm glad to have it. It's also funny. One thing I remember about amps is that IntelliGel released the video that kind of gives the basic overview of it like a year after it came out. For some reason, I guess they were just really behind on video creation. And so I hadn't realized that it existed that whole time. And when that video dropped, I was like, oh, interesting. They have this new VCA. And I was like, wait a minute, it's actually not new. But it was at least another year or so before I got one. And this was another one that was out of stock for a long time, so I had to wait quite a while for it, which made it even funnier that when the one that I got had a defect and had to be exchanged. But fortunately, they had some extra ones. Okay, so yeah, if anyone has anything particularly they want to see, by all means, let me know. But if not, I was kind of thinking something that might be fun to do today is to do some like percussion modulation. Because I have a few modules that are like dedicated percussive voices. Over in my right case, I have 2 modules from WMD, Crater and Kraken, which are a kick drum and a snare drum synthesizer, respectively. So they're just a single module that's designed for lots of different variations of those 2 types of drums. And I also have one other one. Let's see. Yeah, I've got this. So I also have Fracture from WMD, which is like a clap, like a hand clap sort of generator. So mostly due to space constraints, I don't think I ever have Kraken and Fracture in the case at the same time, but I just kind of swap them in and out for variety, and also, if I want a particular sound on one of them. But I find that a lot of the time, I guess one thing I'm guilty of with like my music in general is that I really enjoy the sound design process, sometimes to the extent that I feel I kind of skimp on the sequencing and like making a song that's actually good, which I'm trying to get better at. But I think also that extends to drum programming. So I think like a really good drum groove can totally make or break a song. But most of the time I feel like I don't have kind of the patience for doing a lot of intricate drum programming, and as a result, my drum patterns in my songs tend to be fairly static. So there may be like some minor variation, but it's usually kind of like the same voices that I use. Like I have a kick, a snare, kind of a closed hi-hat sound usually, or maybe like an offbeat open hi-hat. And it's like fairly straightforward. And I feel like I'm kind of not taking good advantage of the fact that you can modulate these voices in real time to get different sounds simultaneously out of the same module. So, for example, with Crater, it's, ostensibly designed for kick drum sounds, right? But most of the components of a kick drum could be tuned in different ways to create sort of a tom-tom sound. And similarly, there's a lot of kind of different timbres that you can get from Kraken for things that sound much less like a realistic snare drum and more like other types of percussion. So I have actually started to experiment with this a little bit. I'm not sure that anyone would have noticed, but in some of my songs over the last couple of months, I've been doing a little bit more of that, where I'm using Crater kind of simultaneously for a kick and tom. And I think was it the most recent song that I posted last week? I think it was, where I was using Crater simultaneously for a quote unquote hi-hat sound, which was actually just like a rim shot with a very short decay, and then also for a normal snare drum sound on the backbeat. So I thought it would be cool today to just like focus on seeing how much we can get out of just like these two modules and maybe a third one. Because I also have Basimilus Aterotasilia, which is a additive FM voice that is very well known for its kind of drum sounds and how much you can modulate to get a lot of different sounding drum voices out of the same module with just different settings. Sunbursta Studios, welcome to the stream, says, I love using rings in modal mode at low frequency for a funky plastic sounding percussion. Works great with marbles. Yes, I mean, so one of the things you can do with a modular synth is just synthesizing your own drums. So, based on how you feel about it, you might consider kind of a dedicated percussion module like these to be sort of cheating, in that like it does a lot of the work for you. But maybe with the exception of Kraken, which I think does like some very advanced physical modeling, the kick drum I think is actually an easier example, because the sound of a kick drum is essentially two components. It's like a pitched low tone, usually with a pitch envelope on it, so it kind of goes doo, 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 right? Like it starts a little bit higher and then it kind of goes down. And then there's also the sort of the transient, so you get a little bit of a snap or a kind of a click, like right on the attack of the drum. And indeed, that's exactly how Crater is designed. So the left column of knobs is dedicated to that sort of like tonal sound, and then the right set of knobs is dedicated to controlling the transient. So why don't we start plugging this in and listening to it? Let me unpatch this other stuff just to reduce the cable spaghetti. And I'll set this aside. Or maybe I'll actually hang this up real quick just so I don't make a mess of things. I never show it on the stream, but I have a really nice little rack for my patch cables that's just to the left of the desk. It sits on top of a microphone stand, and I can sort of turn it around, and there's different lengths of cable on each side. Very handy. Okay, let's plug... see if these cables are long enough. Maybe we'll plug the Crater output into our first mixer channel, and Kraken we will plug into our second mixer channel. Okay, Crater doesn't have a trigger button directly on it, but Kraken does. So I can press that button to manually trigger the drum sound. How's the volume there? It sounds a little quiet to me. Do I have... Oh, you know what? I have the volume down on Zermixa. That's part of this. That sounds a little bit better. So let me get... let's do some kick drum design first. Let me... and maybe we'll use Steppy up here to sequence our drums. This is a 4-channel gate sequencer, so it doesn't do pitches, but it's perfect for drums, which is why I have it located near my drum section. But it needs a clock to drive it. It doesn't have an internal clock. So let me take a... we'll use Pamela's Pro Workout. Let me go back to my main overhead so you can see what I'm doing. On the far left, I have Pamela's Pro Workout, and we can take a 4x multiple of the tempo into the clock input. And then we can also take the dedicated stop output on PAM and plug that into the reset. And so the reset will, anytime I stop the running clock on PAM, it'll reset back to the first step so that when I start it again, the pattern begins from the beginning. What are you all feeling? Do we want a slow tempo or a fast tempo? Maybe I'll go slow wall work programming so we get a good amount of space in between drum hits. And then we can maybe speed it up later if we're feeling it. Okay, so I'm going to start the clock. Let's place down a couple of triggers. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's just 4 on the floor. Basically, this is 2 rows of 8 buttons correspond to like kind of a typical 16-step sequence for like a measure of in the 4/4 time signature. So each 4 buttons represents a single beat that can be subdivided into 16th notes. Sequencing with the Oxy 1. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I generally try to stick to just the modular stuff because I feel like that's usually what people are interested in. But I feel like I oftentimes plug in the Oxy 1 for these streams and never even use it. So I would be happy to do that. Let's switch it up and do that. Or I guess we could use them both, but I'll leave this plugged in. But what I will do is we'll take the clock and reset out of... Let's just feed this through so that we're using both. So the Oxy pipe has a clock output and a reset output. And I can plug those into PAM because PAM has a clock in and it has a run/reset in. And so I'm going to be sort of, the main clock is going to be the Oxy 1. It's sending its clock signals to PAM. So PAM will follow the Oxy 1, and then PAM in turn will send clock and reset to Steppy in case we need some extra channels. The nice part about the Oxy 1 for grid sequencing is that it's kind of easier to look at multiple drum parts at the same time. With the Steppy, you know, at any given point, you're looking at a single channel's worth of 16 steps. And it has 4 tracks, so you can switch between tracks to sequence different instruments, obviously the 4 outputs, but you're only ever seeing one, and so you can't really see kind of like where the hits land in relation to the other tracks. And that's easier to see on the Oxy 1 because you can do like a multi-track grid sequence kind of thing. So let me make sure I have PAM configured correctly for this. This run input has a setting where you can choose, let's see, what is it? Yeah, that works. Yeah, you can choose what the run CV input means, either run or reset. Run means that it's like a gate, and anytime it's got a high gate, the clock should be ticking, and when the gate goes low, the clock should stop. Or you can just consider it to be running all the time, or just control it with the yellow button, and then a gate coming in on the CV input will mean start the sequence from the beginning. But I think we can use the run mode. And then let's go down to the camera zoom on Oxy. How does that look? Let's see if... Can you all read the text on the screen okay? It's a digital zoom from the full resolution of my camera, so it won't be like... It'll probably be a little fuzzy, but this is about the best I can do with a single camera. If there's something on the screen that you can't see clearly enough that you need more of a verbal explanation for, just let me know. So in Oxy 1, each of these numbers in this column represents the 8 different sequencers, and each sequencer has multiple modes of like how it operates. So if I press shift and the number of the sequencer, then I can change the mode. By default, it's set in the mono sequencer, which is designed for like melodic monophonic instruments, but I can switch it to the multi-track sequencer. And in this mode, each of the rows of the grid corresponds to a different instrument. So this is perfect for drum sequencing. And it goes from bottom to top. So like the bottom row is the first drum sequence, and then a row up from there is the second, and so on. And I do need to configure the gate and CV outputs because, this is very flexible. So it doesn't automatically assume that any particular sequencer's data should go out of any particular CV or gate output on the, over the HDMI cable to the pipe. So we need to configure that ourselves, and let's take care of that right away. What is up, Mike? Welcome to the stream. So if I press Shift and the Gen button, we go to the CV gate page. And in this section, the buttons are used to configure which signals from which of the internal sequencers goes out of which of those jacks. So the right half is the gates. So I can do, I think we want the bottom row. The top row, because we're using sequencer 1. So this button here means that we're sending the first gate output, the trigger from the first track on the first sequencer. A little confusing. But if I press maybe just these 2 to start, actually, no, let's do 3 because there's 2 inputs on Kraken. Yeah, that's probably a good way to do this. So I don't know if you can see it, but that first button says track 1, second one says track 2, second says track 3. So all 3 of those are the first 3 gate outputs. And they're all, because they're all in the first row of the grid, that means that they're taking signals from sequencer 1. But then you also set for each of one of these which of the tracks within that sequencer you want it to be, since we're using the multi-track drum mode. Hope that makes sense. But now, if I put some notes down like this, then if I go back to the right case, we can patch this up. So let's get a gate. Let's see if this cable will be long enough. Yeah, these should work. So we take the first gate output and send that into the trigger for Crater. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change this up because Crater has a trigger input and an accent input, and Kraken has a head input, a rim input, and an accent input. So there's actually 5 trigger inputs that we can use. So I'm going to reconfigure this a bit. I think we're going to do the first trigger, or the first output from Oxy 1 is going to go into the Crater trigger. The second one will be the Crater accent. And then we've got 3 more. So let's do the third channel, or the third gate output into Kraken's head input. The fourth output into the rim input. And the 5th gate output goes into the accent input of Kraken. And actually, yeah, the camera's got a good angle, so you can all see the panel still, even with all those cables plugged in. I'm looking at it from a different angle, so it kind of blocks my view a little bit, but we can make do. Okay, let's see. Let's go back to the Oxy 1 camera. Okay, so let's reconfigure this. Actually, I think it's fine. We'll leave it that way, but we'll just turn on all 5 of the first outputs to be the first 5 tracks of the multi-track sequencer. So now from bottom going up, lowest row is the kick drum trigger. Next row is the kick drum accent. Then the snare drum head trigger, the snare drum rim trigger, and the snare drum accent trigger. So maybe let's do a little sound design first. So let's hit play and make sure this actually works. Okay, sure enough, we're getting our 4 kick drums. So everything's patched correctly. And let's go over to the right case and start messing with the sound design to get our kind of bass kick drum sound. So the top knob is the decay. Let me actually turn the click off just for now. So with the transient turned off, again, these left knobs control the body of the sound, like the pitched aspect of the kick drum. So the top knob is the decay, which is like how long it lasts. You can get quite short, and it can also get pretty long. And you've got a pitch control. So you can get pretty high into a range that you wouldn't normally associate with a kick drum. But again, this is what I'm talking about, is that you can get effectively different sounding instruments from what is ostensibly a kick drum module. But let's start with a fairly low pitch and a little bit of body so we can really kind of hear it there. And then these bottom two knobs are what you use to control the pitch envelope. So, as I mentioned, if you turn, try to kind of keep it small, there's a little bit of like change in the pitch from the pitch at the initial attack, and then it goes down to something lower. So the top knob is the pitch decay. This is like how long it takes to get from its initial pitch to the one that it comes to rest at. So if I turn it way up, you'll hear it more prominently. And that's how you get into sort of the kind of laser drum territory. So this is, again, how long it takes to get from its highest point to its lowest point, and then amount is the actual pitch of that initial point. So we have it fairly low now, but if I turn this up, we'll start to get more laser drum gun sort of sounds. Right, so when you get into the high settings, this really doesn't sound like a kick drum in any way. It's very different. But we can have like a high amount with a low pitch envelope decay. So the little laser is like very fast, but it travels a big distance in pitch. Right? So there's a lot of control over sort of the body of this sound just with these four controls. And yes, Bad Machine, I think that's a great idea. This module that I have next to Crater called Traffic is used for multi-gate sequencing with modulation signals. We'll get into that. I think that maybe we'll use Steppy for that. That would be a good setup. We've also got clipping modes on Crater. So I've got it in the left position out of 3, and as you toggle them to the right, you get sort of overdrive on the tonal part of the kick drum. So there's 3 different settings of overdrive. You start to get that kind of really exaggerated pitch envelope when you turn up the clipping. I guess it's like a soft clip and a hard clip sort of sound. So depending on whether you're doing something more techno-y, you might want a really in-your-face laser drummy sort of kick. Generally, in my music, I use much more subdued, kind of thuddy, low kicks because I like kind of more of a mellow sound. But we can do whatever we want because there are no rules. Yeah, Satcom Demon says, imagining how tight you'd have to tune a kick drum's head to get that sound. I'm assuming you're referring to like this. It's not realistic at all. And this is kind of the blessing and the curse of, synthesizing sounds as opposed to what you can do in the physical world, is that it's pretty hard in most cases to get a synthesized sound that really convincingly replicates the sound of an acoustic instrument. So I think it's not hard to hear that this isn't a real kick drum, even at its kind of like most realistic settings. But similarly, it's very easy to get sounds out of something like this that you couldn't get out of a physical instrument. So depending on your goals, there's kind of pros and cons to the two of them. Sunburst of Studio says, slightly counterintuitive as the buttons say 1 to 8 and you assign the first 5 tracks, but the kick pattern is column 8 going up. Yeah, it is a little confusing. So let me go back to the Oxy one. Maybe I'll explain that a little bit better. I think it's just the fact that I happen to be using a multi-track sequencer. But you can say when I press one of these 1 to 8 buttons, it's an entirely different sort of isolated sequencer, which can have its own mode. So any of these 8 can be one of these different types. If I go into the mode, so there's monophonic for like and polyphonic, which are for pitched voices. So this would be like a bass or just like a single mono synth. Poly is capable of playing multiple notes at once, which is generally less relevant for modular synthesis, where voices tend to be monophonic, but definitely with like with MIDI control for like a desktop synthesizer, or plugged into your computer to control a software synthesizer, there's plenty of polyphonic synths. And then chord mode is a variant of the poly mode that is built on letting you sort of sequence a chord by letter name and by quality, rather than tapping in each individual constituent note of the chord. So that's very handy. And there's a couple of other sort of modes that are more experimental, but the last kind of primary mode is this multi-track one, which is the one that we're using. So normally in like the monophonic mode, I'll just show you let me stop this for a second. So in the monophonic mode, the x-axis on the grid represents time, and the y-axis is the pitch of notes. So if I do something like this, then that's like a scale that's going up every 16th note and then coming back down. Right? So this is like, the step as a division of 16 steps within a bar of music. And the verticality is just what the pitch is at that step. And of course you can change the scale. So like which absolute pitch this is depending on how you configure the scale. So right now it's chromatic, so it's just going up by half step, but I can change the scale to something like major, and then you get C, D, E, F. Well, I guess in this case, but you're going by basically whole or half tones following the major scale all the way up to an octave. So that's kind of the usual way that you'd look at a grid like this. And all of this that we're seeing right now is just on sequencer 2, which is isolated. So in the case of, let me clear this out actually. In the case of sequencer 1, this is using multi-track mode where it actually uses multiple instruments on a single grid, as opposed to those other modes where you're controlling essentially a single instrument across the whole grid. But the idea is that because you're generally using this to sequence drums, you only care about the triggers, like where they land in time, and not their pitched values. So that's why it represents it like this, where you just care about, similar to Steppy that we were looking at up here. This is gates only, so there's no pitches associated. So it's just a number of steps in a 4/4 measure. And so that's what we're looking at here. And the reason it goes from bottom to top is that generally, if you're not using the whole grid of 8, you want the controls for the first one to be as close to you as possible as you're sitting in front of it. Because you're, maybe turning on and off steps, and it just feels a little bit more natural for it to move away from you like that. But of course, these are just numbers. So if you find it more intuitive to go from the top down, that would be fine. You would just have to know that internally the sequencer treats this as track 8 within multi-track, and you would, patch your cables accordingly to your voices. But it's totally arbitrary. Like it's just numbers. And it doesn't know where you're sending the signals. So that's fine. That makes sense? Cool. All right, so let's go back to our kick drum design. Let's get this playing again. What are you all feeling in terms of the type of kick drum that we're making? You want something laser drummy or something more subdued? We can do something maybe that's kind of more subdued but has that bit of overdrive on it for a bit of punch. I want to give it a decent amount of decay too. Okay, so we've talked about the left side here that's used for the body of the sound like this. Let me actually turn the clipping off just while we're talking. And then the right side handles the transient. So I have the volume turned down all the way, but let me turn it back up. You hear that, how there's a kind of a little click on the initial attack of the kick drum? That's like the other component of like what a realistic snare or kick drum sound is. So the top control is timbre. And as you turn this, it's kind of like, I think this side is digital, and it's essentially just like samples of sort of different types of noise, and the different positions on the potentiometer just give you different sounds for that transient. The second knob is the decay, so like how long that lasts. And the third knob is the audio level of the click, so you can make it quieter. I tend to like a fairly snappy click, like not more than kind of 50% up. So like noon is maybe a good starting place. And you can just kind of go through with the timbres and find one that sounds good with your sound. My taste is generally to go with ones that are like not super noticeable. Like that one I find to be kind of obtrusive. or the ones that kind of sound like a second attack, almost like that. So maybe I should kind of move out of my comfort zone, but like that's kind of my taste for the transient. And you can make it more or less pronounced by changing the decay. But I tend to like kind of a snappy transient. There's also this last control, sustain, which has a couple of functions in the way it affects the sound. I may be misremembering, but I think it has something to do with one of them is like kind of like the sustain on an ADSR, that like when the body or when the drum first hits, there's kind of like a decay envelope that goes from the initial peak down to like the sustain level, and then it fades out again a little more after that. And so generally, and I think there's like a second thing where it kind of affects the tail of the decay in some way too. I actually can't remember exactly how it works. But you can kind of just use your ears. I think overall the effect is that it kind of just increases how much of the body of the sound you hear. I'll stop talking so you can hear it as I turn the knob. Let's start at the bass, the lowest sustain. It's pretty subtle, especially at these low pitched settings. I think just kind of in the last maybe quarter of the turn of this knob does it actually start to feel a little bit more heavy in the low end. But I think having it all the way up is probably good. Try the different clipping modes. So maybe this could work as sort of our baseline kick drum sound. And then if we go back to the Oxy 1, we've also got this second trigger row as accents. That's going into the accent input on Crater. So maybe let's try giving an accent on that first kick drum. It's pretty subtle, but I think you can hear that accented note stands out a little bit. I think it's just maybe making it a little bit louder, but maybe it's also a slight pitch variation. It's kind of hard for me to tell how it's actually changing it. Maybe I'd turn up the decay or the pitch a little bit to see if we can hear this more obviously. It's subtle, but I think it's mostly just it's turning the velocity of the hit up a little bit on that accented note. And let me try putting a trigger on a column that doesn't have a main trigger. I'm not sure what. Okay, so if you trigger the accent input when the drum is not sounding, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't give you like a secondary sound. That's not the case on Kraken though. If we move over to our snare drum, Kraken has multiple inputs that do different things. So let me start with giving it like kind of a backbeat. So we'll put snare drum head hits on the second and fourth downbeat, and we'll listen to them together first. Okay. So let me turn off the kick drum so we can just focus on the snare. And let's move back to our right case. So maybe I'll try to go through this a little bit faster so I'm not taking forever explaining all the nuances of this. But we're sending triggers into the head input right now. So this is like hitting the sort of the body or the main membrane of the snare drum. Shell is the thing that gives like kind of the quality of the noise created from hitting the drum. So this is kind of like the click timbre knob on Crater. This is like the general sort of sound that you get from it. And there's a decay knob, which is how long the sound rings out. And then second most important, I think, is the snares knob, the bottom right, controls how much of that snare sound you hear. So if you turn it all the way off, it's like, I'm not sure what the right terminology is on a real snare drum, but like essentially disconnecting the snare from the drum so that you're just hearing the resonance of hitting the surface of the drum without the snare. That's kind of what that sound is. And then as you turn this up, you start to hear more of the snare. So you can think of it as kind of like crossfading between a pitched sound and a noisy sound. And then you have a dedicated pitch control, which you can kind of hear is changing the body of the drum. And a couple of other controls related to the pitch. So there's overtone, which gives a little bit more of that ringing. Oh, thanks, Tyler. Hope this was interesting. I'll see you another time. Have a good evening. So here's overtone, and then there's also low tune. Just maybe hard to hear under certain settings. They're just kind of different parts of the harmonics produced. And it's got a couple of different variations. So there's like a digital noise, where it's the same, exactly the same sort of exciter of the drum every time, and sounds very consistent on each hit, versus an analog noise source that'll add a little bit of variation. And then there's a few different types of like tails, I think. Oh no, rec. So these are like different sort of distortion models. There's kind of a more bit crushed sound. So again, lots of like variety in the sounds you can create from this. Let's maybe find something kind of subtle as our baseline sound. Turn the decay down. Maybe the snare is about halfway. That's pretty good. Let's turn the kick drum back on. And then we've also got accents on the snare drum, which is our, let's see, that'll be the 5th channel. So let me try putting an accent on the 2nd snare drum hit. Also pretty subtle. I think it's kind of doing the same thing, where it's just increasing the velocity a bit. Like you're hitting the drum a little bit harder, but doesn't. I think it's mostly just increasing the volume of the sound. It's not changing the harmonics really at all, at least that I can hear. So the other thing that's cool with Kraken is you can get 2 different sound effects depending on which trigger or which input you send triggers to. So right now we're just listening to the head, but I can stick in maybe a couple of rim hits in between. So having a little bit of offbeat syncopation there already goes a long way to giving us like a more groovy, enjoyable beat. So you can see based on which of these 2 triggers lands, you get a different sound. So these 2 columns are doing... Oh, sorry, we're looking at the wrong screen. Go back to the Oxy one. So what I did is, let me take these off. That's what we were looking at before. This one is the accent on our 2nd snare hit. And then the row right below it, 5 with the orange lights, is the rim shot input. So if I just put in... So you get a different sort of sound on those rim shots. I'm not sure it necessarily sounds like a rim shot, really. And then I believe if you have a trigger for both inputs on the same step, it'll give you a 3rd sound. Let's try that. Yeah, it's a little hard to tell. Yeah, should we ditch the 4 on the floor? Let's get a different setup for the drum. Let's see, I'm trying to think what a drum and bass beats pattern looks like. It's like, right? Now it's kind of like on an offbeat, right? Like that. Is that kind of the bass line for like a drum and bass sort of beat? Let me speed up the BPM, because we want something like 140 or above, right? Let's get our accent back on the first kick drum. And maybe an accent on the second snare drum. Yep. And then let's give a rim shot. Just kind of fill in some rim shots on kind of off beats. Yeah, not bad. What do we think? Maybe, I feel like the snare drum might be a little much for this kind. Let me pull back the snare amount so it's just a little more pitched and less kind of noisy. It might actually sound better to have just the rim shots. No, we do need the full snare. We need that head. There, gave it some overtone. A little low tone. We could try different shells. I mean, in my mind, it's kind of like a very short, snappy decay on this kind of sound. Yeah. Okay, so what we can try to do now is maybe put some other triggers down for these two voices, but on those kind of extra triggers, we'll send modulation signals at the same time, which will change the parameters to make the drum sound like a different drum. At least that's my goal. We'll see how well we do at it. So let me start with the kick drum. Maybe we'll get kind of like a low tom sort of sound, or at least attempt to. Right here. Yeah. I think that's the, what, 1/8 note before the third beat. So the and of two in sort of musical counting terms. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a is like how you would count 16th notes in 4/4. So this is on the and, 2 E and a, on the and of two. So now we've got this sort of like extra kick drum here, but I want to send modulation signals on this. So let's, should we try using Steppy for distinguishing this maybe? I guess technically we don't even really need the, no, I think this makes sense. Okay, I just started thinking here. So we're going to use Steppy to trigger different modulations, but not to trigger the hits, because we've already got the hits patched in to the trigger inputs. Let me take off the 4 on the floor that I programmed in here, and we're going to put one trigger on Steppy, or sorry, on Steppy right there, which is kind of like corresponding to the position of that extra kick drum that I added. And then we're going to use traffic. So let me explain what this does. I'm going to take a short cable, and we're going to take the output of A, which is our first channel that we're programming. We're going to send that in to the trigger input, the first trigger input of traffic. So what Traffic is designed to do is to take up to 3 different trigger sequences, combine those into a single trigger sequence, which is summed at this output jack right here, and sent to a single module to trigger it. So if you have, for example, like a kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat kind of pattern, which is what this was really designed for, then you're going to get a trigger sent out on this trigger sum for the triggers of all 3 of those combined in a single signal. And then for each of the 3 triggers, you're going to get 3 different modulation signals per track. So the idea is that you use it with a voice that is capable of making different drum sounds, and you kind of use these as presets, where if the trigger came in from the first trigger input, then when that trigger is sent to the sum output, it uses the CV settings for the 3 channels that you have associated with that. And then you do the same for the second channel and the third channel. So you can see that there's 3 CV outputs, A, B, and C. And the vertical line here is showing that these 3 trimmers down the left column are the CV A, B, and C values for any triggers coming from this first trigger input. So what we need to decide is what we want to patch those to. We've got 3 choices. Of course, we can multiply these for multiple, but I think we're definitely going to want to change the pitch as one of these things. So that'll go into this volt per octave input. And we should already be able to hear it. If I turn up this first trimmer, we should start to hear a different pitch on that and of 2. Maybe that's not going to work because it's like kind of using it as the bass line. It seems like it's affecting it even when it's not active. We may need to plug this into the second channel. Let's try this. Oh, that is not at all working how I was hoping. Okay, I guess what we're going to have to do here is maybe send constant triggers into the first input. Because what I was expecting would happen is that it would send, like in the first input, I was expecting that it wouldn't send any CV out when this one isn't, when the first channel isn't being triggered. But as you can hear, if I turn up the CV value for A, it's sending that CV value out all the time, even when it's not receiving a trigger. This is actually surprising. It's not a way I've used Traffic before, where it's like you're using it for its modulation signals, but not its trigger signals. Not what we want. So I think what I'm going to have to do is actually send a sort of like, we're going to have to use the first channel sort of like a dummy, right? So I'm going to program in all 16 steps on channel 1, or channel A, I guess, on step E, so that it's sending that baseline value by default on all steps. And then we're going to switch to, you know, we can hear now that it's not changing the pitch, right? If I turn up like this second one and the third one, it's not changing the pitch because we're not getting any triggers on the second and third channel yet. But let me change step E now to its B track, the second track. We'll put that extra hit in there, and then let's plug in the B channel to Traffic's second channel. And the way that Traffic works is that it prioritizes, if I'm not mistaken, channels from right to left. So if it gets a trigger on 1 and 2 at the same time, it will send the CV values for 2. We'll confirm that as I turn this pot up. Okay, I may have gotten that backwards. So maybe we want this plugged in on the third channel. Yep, there we go. Okay, a little confusing maybe. Hey, thanks for stopping by, Satcom Demon. Always appreciate you. Okay, so this has been a little enlightening for me because I thought it went the other way. Sorry if this is confusing, but let me recap what's happening here. So on channel On the first track of Steppy, I've programmed in every 16th note. So on every possible trigger of our 4/4 16th note pattern, we're sending a trigger from Steppy to the third trigger input on traffic. And this is the one that has the least priority. So again, we're ignoring the sum trigger. We're not using that to actually trigger the drums. We only care about what modulation signals are being sent out of CV A, B, and C. So I've left the CV value for CV output A all the way at the baseline. So it's sending out essentially 0 volts at all times. And maybe we don't even need this trigger here, actually. Yeah, no, we do. So that's kind of like our baseline. We're not affecting the sound by default. But then on our second sequence on Steppy, we have one trigger programmed that coincides with the same 16th note timing as that extra trigger that I programmed on the Oxy 1. And that trigger is coming into the second channel of traffic. And I've turned up the pot to increase the amount of CV sent out on CVA whenever that triggers. So when that particular note happens, or when that particular trigger happens, it's going to override and take priority over the third channel of traffic. And you'll be able to see that it's actually sending CV on that step. So if you watch the LED just to the left of the green cable, you'll see that it flashes green right when you hear that kind of tom-tom sound. Right? Because it's taking priority over the third channel. And the amount of CV that it sends to this volt per octave input is determined by this first pot. So we can sort of tune that secondary note. But we also have two other parameters to work with. So I think we want to also change the decay time, which would be this guy. So if I then turn up this middle pot, this will be controlling the amount of CV that we send to the decay input on Creator for our for these secondary hits. Doesn't last very long. I think maybe just because it's kind of a momentary signal, it's going back down too quickly. That might be what's happening here. Let me also turn the pitch down a little bit. So you see what's happening is that on the B output right above my finger, you see the same thing, that lights up on that extra hit. And theoretically, that should be increasing the decay time. But the problem is that it only lasts for as long as like the trigger does. Maybe what we need to do here is increase the gate time. So if I press edit, oh yeah, this is probably what's happening here. If I press the edit button on Steppy, you're now editing the length of the gate that it sends out on a step. So I'm going to try increasing this to like the maximum. You hear that? It's interesting it's not consistent. Maybe it's randomized? So what's happening here is like we're only sending that extra decay value for as long as that gate lasts, coming in on the second trigger input. Am I on the wrong channel? Yeah, this is right. It's interesting that it's kind of inconsistent. You hear sometimes the longer gate and sometimes I think it's getting cut off by the fact that we have these constant 16th notes. Let me try turning off the baseline 16th note gate. Yeah, you hear that? So I think what was happening there is that we get that initial gate on the AND of 2, but then our sort of baseline 16th note pattern that we're sending on channel 3 to kind of keep the default settings static comes in and it like cuts off the previous CV value. So I don't want it to be too extreme. I just want it to give a little bit of a sense of a groove without like massively changing the sound. But that sounds pretty good. So there we kind of have another another sound that we can use. Let's maybe also thinking about turning off the click level. I guess for this one we want to invert the signal, because I have the click level, like the level of that transient, all the way up. This is what it sounds like with the transient turned off. And I want the transient on the main kick drum, but I want to turn it off for that extra hit. So to do that, we need to send negative voltage to the click level, just on that one beat. So you can do bipolar settings on traffic, but I think it affects all the channels. So maybe we'll try that actually. This might work. We'll have to reconfigure things a bit here. Oh, the problem with this is it's going to affect every channel. Let's try it. So I think in bipolar mode, I need to set the trimmers on the third channel to noon instead of all the way counterclockwise. That's like the 0 volt position, essentially. Yeah. So we want kind of a little bit of pitch increase and a little bit of decay increase. So we should go a little bit right of noon. That's too much. And then fully counterclockwise on the bottom pot, which is now bipolar. So this is now sending a fully negative signal, which we need to plug into the click level. You hear that? How the click goes away? And you can see that represented in the color of the lights. So the top two CV outputs flash green when a trigger comes in on the second channel, meaning that the CV being sent out is positive. And then we've got kind of an orangish reddish LED on the bottom here showing that the CV value coming out on the third channel is negative when that trigger hits. So let's tune this a little bit better. Maybe the there, you see? So now we've got sort of a secondary sound coming out of Crater. This is a little fiddly to get this set up with this particular collection of modules that I've chosen. I think we could maybe have achieved this easier by just sending modulation signals directly from the Auxy 1. But I think this has actually been a pretty good intellectual challenge of how to get this working. And hopefully this is not too confusing, then you understand what's happening. How we're using Steppy, how we're using traffic, and how it's kind of affecting the sound that Creator is producing. Let me know if anyone has questions or wants me to sort of recover any of that. But hopefully going through it bit by bit was pretty clear. Nice. Should we maybe get a little delay going on this? Let me get my long cables and we'll plug into, or actually maybe we'll use, yeah, what the hell, we'll just use we'll use C-legs like we usually do. Oh yeah. Okay, so stereo input to C-legs, stereo output back into the mixer return. Oh, let me go to my cam overhead. Okay, and let's get, oh, we want to clock this also. So let me get a, another 4/4 clock or sorry, a 4x clock on 16th notes. So we're going to use output number 1 on Pamela's Pro Workout as the clock source for C legs. So C legs will know our tempo. Yeah. And slow time, let's do a digital delay, ping pong mode. Sounds good, sounds good. We're using it as a send, so we're going to go fully wet. And then over here on the mixer, I will just increase the amount of send on the snare drum. I think we want maybe a medium length delay. That's kind of cool. Maybe filter out a little bit of the low end of the snare. Oh, that sounds good. And give a little bit of offset for the right channel so we get a little bit more of a stereo effect. We could try adding some delay to the bass also, the kick drum also. Generally you don't want delay on a kick drum, but I've heavily filtered out the low end, so this might actually sound okay. I don't know. What do you think? Can add a little bit of reverb. We want a fairly short decay, just kind of like a room reverb. We don't want to hear the tail much. That sounds pretty cool. Yeah. Still a pretty kind of unnatural tail on that, like decay tail on Crater. Let's see. It sounds more like almost like a bass sound than like a tom-tom, really. I think ideally I would want that to kind of trail off a little bit more. Let me try turning off one of the trigger at the beginning of the third beat. That's actually pretty cool. Let's try decreasing the gate value on this again. On the B channel, yeah, it's kind of an odd use of steppy in traffic. So it's hard to not have the channels kind of override each other. I think they're really designed for something like the Symbolus, where the amount of, like essentially the CV settings at exactly the time when the drum is triggered affects the full life of that particular sound, regardless of what comes after it. And I think what's happening here is that Crater is kind of more reacting in real time to the signals we're sending it. And so if we change the decay time after the initial trigger for that sort of tom bass sound, it's going to do that immediately. It's not keeping track of the fact that they're kind of two different voices. Hell yeah. Okay, so let's do something a little more nuts, because I was kind of imagining that we would use traffic maybe for Kraken also, but I don't think it's going to work because there's just not really enough channels to handle this. I guess we could use the... Let's look at our sequence again. Let's see where we might place a drum hit that would make sense here. That's kind of cool. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a little bit of probability. So on this, on the and of 1, I want this to just happen once in a while, but not all the time. So if I hold the note down, I can change the trigger probability. Let's set it to like, actually let's do it like a logic setting where we're going to have this trigger on the 4th out of every fourth repeat, and the same with this one. So setting those settings, it makes it so that it's actually keeping track of how many times it's repeated through the loop, and these two triggers are only going to happen on the 4th iteration each time. So even though you see them lit on the grid, it's almost as though we've copied the pattern 4 times and only entered these triggers on the 4th copy. But this is something I love about Oxy 1, is having sort of like trigger probability and logic functions, where even in a single grid you can add a lot of variation by adding this kind of stuff. Let's do that here. Let's add a second kind of double trigger on this, but do a probability on this so that it like only happens like 15% of the time, or like on a given cycle, there's a 15% chance that this trigger will actually activate. So most of the time we don't hear it, but once in a while we get that kind of extra flourish. We could maybe use mimetic digitalis as another modulation source to maybe make some changes to Kraken. How much time do we have left? So we've got roughly 10 minutes of the stream left, but let's try that. So I'm going to send let's send another 4x modifier of the clock, which is a 16th note rate. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong camera. So I just set the second output to be another ×4 multiplication of the BPM. I'm going to send that into, the input, the clock input of mimetic, which is a CV sequencer. One second. It's funny, I just got my first like moderated message ever. For some reason, one of these messages it thought was a problem. I don't know why. Something you love about the NerdSeq, plenty of random and probability functions. Yeah, I think it's a really important. I think most modern sequencers have things like that where you can kind of affect the probability of a trigger. But I definitely think it's like an important part, especially for rhythmic parts, to make sequences more interesting. You start to get a lot of variation, even just with like, you know, a single measure's worth of sequence. Okay, so now we've got our 16th note clock advancing mimetic digitalis. Let me zoom in here. I guess it's maybe a little bit hard to see. What's up, Ted Rosner? Welcome to the stream. We're almost about to end, but I'm always happy to see you. So this is a 16-step sequencer. It has kind of like a 4x4 grid of LEDs here, but it's just 16 steps in a row, which you can kind of see by following the pattern of the LED. And on all of these steps, you can set a specific CV value, and then you have 4 channels, each of which has a programmable CV value per step. So I'm just going to select all the channels, and if you press shred, I think actually it's load and shred, it's going to assign a random CV value to every step. So this is just kind of a good way of getting stepped random modulation. You can see the lights at the top on the outputs are all kind of flashing with different intensity. So let us patch these outputs into, we might need to attenuate here, but let's try it just without first. Actually, no, let's go through the attenuator. That's probably wise. And let's see. Okay, so I'm going to take each of these 4 outputs, and I'm going to send them into the inputs on Lapsus Os, which is a signal attenuator. Just allows you to sort of decrease the amount of signal coming through. And then from this, we're going to send the outputs of the attenuator into some different parameters on the snare drum. And we don't yet have hits on those other channels, so this will probably sound weird initially. But let's maybe change the shell model. And I'm going to turn the attenuators all the way up so we get the full strength signal. And the decay, I'm just kind of picking random parameters here. And what is this? The rec model. And velocity, that's a good one. Thinking of swapping out Mimeophone for C-Legs. I'm not sure you want my opinion because it's not very well informed, but I really dislike the panel design of Make Noise. So even if they had like the coolest module on earth, I think I'm just really turned off from any of their stuff. So aesthetically, I would say yes, do it. As to whether the functionality is actually better, I mean, for some, obviously better is completely an opinion. I can't really say. But if anyone else in the chat has experience with both Mimeophone and C-Legs, help our boy Ted Rosner out. Let him know what you think. Ted, you might also want to say like what your goals are, because that, of course, matters a lot. So this sounds very different than we had before, right? Let's see, where are my snare hits? They're on basically 2 and 4. I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop these playback of mimetic so that I can program individual steps here. So we want the 2nd and 4th downbeat to be kind of like the default CV value. So I'm going to press 0 while that step is highlighted. And similarly with, wait, is that right? Yeah, that's right. So that one, and then we also want zeros on this step. And I actually need a reset on this. So let me, on Pam, this is a little, getting mimetic to be like kind of right on the beat is kind of annoying because it's reset and trigger happen at the same time. But I'm going to use my 3rd output. Is there like a start? Where is it? No, I guess it's all the way at the end. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so on the start, I need a longer cable here. I'm going to set the start trigger from PAM into the origin input. I'm going to stop the sequence for a second, and I think I need to put, I need to position mimetic on the 16th step, I think. Let's see if this works. I think I programmed the wrong steps here. I did 1 and 3 and it should have been 2 and 4. So let's go back to, let me just shred again. A bunch of random random steps for everything, and then the second one should be zeroed out, and the fourth one should be zeroed out. And then if I go to 16 and start playing again, oh no, I have to turn on the sequencer here. It's kind of subdued. Let's try shredding again. That's cool. Let me do this again. It's a little wonky. We're kind of rushing here towards the end. Let me zero this out again. 0, 0. This is kind of fun. And then we can sort of perform a little bit with this too, because we can change the amount of attenuation on any of these 4 CV signals that we're sending in. So I can kind of dial back the degree of velocity change, or completely remove the rec model changing. Decrease the amount of decay change or the amount of shell model change. It's pretty cool, huh? So, you know, this is just supposed to be like, most of the time I just use it as like a snare, right? Like a fairly straightforward backbeat. But with a bunch of extra triggers and modulation, we're getting some cool stuff. Oh, actually, you know, we're still only triggering. We could theoretically add some more triggers here to like here, because, you know, some of these CV signals are kind of being sent to Kraken on steps where there isn't a drum trigger coming in. So I could try adding a few more triggers. That's pretty awesome, huh? So just from modulating these voices, you can get a way more complex drum pattern from just what on its own would be a kick drum and snare drum. Let's add some more color. Should we overdrive the delay a bit? Pull back the high pass filter that I have applied to the delay and get more of the low end in the delayed sound. We can modulate the delay time. Introduce some noise, maybe. Not sure that really adds much. Let's sync. Oh, I actually have not had the delay synced this entire time. I'm a moron. That sounds awesome. I'm such an idiot. I forgot to press the delay sync button. So that whole time we were ignoring the clock signal on C-Legs. I just happened to tune it manually to a time that sounded good. Yeah, okay, this is now clocked. So the time is now clocked, and the internal modulation source is also clocked to the tempo. Sounds so cool. Let's mess with the kind of the pattern to kind of vary it up even more. I think this was a very good example of two things that I kind of was hoping to demonstrate and learn, which is A, like, can we get some cool modulation out of our drum voices to get very different sounding stuff? And B, just kind of the exploratory nature of modular. That there's, obviously a degree of intentionality between what, of what I did here. Like, I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to achieve, but like the specific sound that we're hearing is not something I like meticulously designed. It's more like we kind of set up the parameters for how the system should behave. And then did a little kind of just exploring and trying things. All right, well, it's now a little past 3, so I think we're ready to wrap up. And as always, I would like you all to know that I very much appreciate you coming to my streams. It is so much fun to do these, to geek out about one of my favorite things to do with a bunch of other people that like it too. So I hope you learned something from this. I certainly did, from this exploration. And I should mention that I do have a Patreon account if you would like to support the work that I do. Mike, thanks so much for the super. Very much appreciated, and that's a good timing. So yeah, if you'd like to support the work that I do in doing these streams every week, and the videos that I've been producing, both the musical performances and the educational videos, head on over to patreon.com/Perceptes. You can join for free if you want, and it'll just give you sort of updates about when new stuff is coming. But you can also chip in a few dollars every month, and I've got a whole bunch of benefits for the paid subscribers. You can download high-quality audio of all the music that I post to the channel. You'll get patch notes for all of the educational streams that have, like, comprehensive text descriptions of what I did in the video, if you want to kind of learn from that after the fact or try to recreate something that I did. And a whole bunch of other stuff. There's also a Discord server for the community to join if you want to come chat about this stuff. There should be a link in the description, but you can do bit.ly/Perceptes Discord, capital Perceptes, capital Discord. But again, just check the link. You can join that for free too, but you'll get access to extra channels with a paid Patreon subscription. Anyway, lots more detail about what you get by going to Patreon to check that out. And anyone that's willing to chip in, I'm really, really appreciative of that. It's going to help me continue to do this on a long-term basis. Well, this was really fun. Thank you very much, everyone. And I will see you next week. But stay tuned for a new video on Wednesday where I will be talking about building a small system for drones and sound design. And next week we'll probably be looking at the natural gate, since I will have had a chance to actually install that in the case and spend a little time with it. Take care, everyone.